So, Helen Lawson and David Gibbs, thank you both for joining me for this Red Letter Christians dialogue today. So, David, we met at the Society for the Study of Theology last year, where you delivered a paper, The End of the World Happened Again on 25th May 2020, with
Yes.
George Floyd saying, I can't breathe.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit, just for 2 or 3 minutes, about your background?
Yeah. Based on the title from George Floyd, obviously, I'm a black man.
Hmm.
Long and short of it, living in, or shall we call it colonial Britain, or yeah. So, yeah, my parents are part of what's known as the Windrush generation. So they've been here for, well, I'll be approaching 70 years soon. I'd say over the last 5 years, and then it just crystallized with George Floyd. That moment, I can't breathe. Why is it that we're finding it so difficult to breathe in this country as Black people with Caribbean history and background? Even though we were invited here, we were never welcomed and never really supported. So it just seems that we're always struggling and fighting. And I just want to try to identify some of the issues and hopefully make it a bit easier for people who follow. So, yeah. So I'm from inner city Birmingham, grew up there, went through the secondary education here, went into work, and I've been fighting the same battles for about 50 years.
So, Helen, we know each other through your work at the Greenhouse and with Red Letter Christians. And I asked you to be part of this dialogue today because of your work with LGBTQ youth at the Greenhouse.
Before I came to the Greenhouse, which is a retreat and education centre, I was a pastor for many, many years and was kind of had the extraordinary experience of coming alongside a number of people from the LGBTQ plus community. And over a period of years, that engagement transformed my faith, my experience of God for the better, also made me increasingly unwelcome at church. When I moved out of that kind of ministry to come and be the director of the Greenhouse here, part of my heart was to make a space for people who have not necessarily been able to access these places. So to create a space of retreat, of training, of a place where spiritual formation goes hand in hand with social action, particularly for people who have typically got economic barriers or barriers around inclusion of any kind, that can't kind of access these spaces, because what they have to offer, the Christian faith, as well as society as a whole, is so relevant and important for our time.
We're reflecting on the Isaiah vision together, specifically Isaiah 65, verse 25. So the first question is, how do you hear what the Spirit is saying through these chapters in terms of Isaiah's vision?
I don't think you'll be able to make this out clearly.
Oh, it's a ring. I see a ring.
This is my college ring with the seal on it. This is when we studied in America. It's the equivalent verse, but from Isaiah 11, the lion shall lay down with the lamb. So
Okay.
so I wear that, right?
Wow.
On my, because that was sort of, that encapsulates what the vision was for my church as it was then. So when I read these scriptures, I bring a lot of history, stroke baggage, but I put it in the context of exactly what's going on today as we speak, in Israel, Palestine, Gaza as well, and just hoping and praying that whoever identifies whichever in that story, that there would be peace. The chosen people, whoever they are, the people who are not chosen, whoever they are, and then being reconciled. And I think that's what I hear, this cry and this desire for one humanity, where people are at peace, where they live with each other, where they respect each other. The two questions I came away from was, what does justice look like? And what does inclusion look like? So, so when I read that, that's all I'm hearing, that you won't need to fear or worry anymore because there will be real peace.
well, you won't believe this, but I have a ring as well.
What?
So
Oh, that's
it's a
beautiful.
Celtic ring with two hands either side of a crowned heart.
Okay.
And I bought this after a particularly painful time, trying to work with somebody who was really different from me. Many times nearly walking away, having to put a lot of energy into the woundedness that actually comes from that kind of work, and the cost of reconciliation, and the meeting of Christ in the midst of that. And so for me, this symbol, you've got two hands either side of Christ, and one hand is this other person, this other party, and one hand is mine, and we're both touching Christ. But we are coming at it differently, and we have to navigate that journey together. And that is for me, following Christ is much of that. Yeah, it's really amazing to see the need for us to carry these symbols in this passage. The lion and the lamb is just the dream of the time when we will come to a place where we will all be able to relate to each other without eating each other or being eaten.
Yeah.
That is a miracle to me, because we're in this competitive colonial empire system where for one person to exist, another person has to be erased. That hurts everybody, but not equally. And for me, this picture of predator and prey being at the table, it kind of names the very thing that it is at the heart of our warring, and our woundedness will be taken away. And actually many days I struggle to have hope for that. And so I need that.
It wasn't easy 4 years of studying, but I have a lot of pleasant memories that go with it, and that vision, irrespective of how it was lived out, the vision was still strong. That we approached it differently, as you said, but we still hope for that peace. But as you said again, we impose what that peace looks like, don't we? But I come from an evangelical background as well, which just complicates it no end. The very people who are supposed to be professing the good news seem to be professing, in a lot of instances, something else, and it usually is more barriers.
Absolutely. And evangelical background the same. And one of the things that I really appreciated that came up a number of times in these papers was the evolving approach to scripture that is being gifted to us by these people who have had to open the difficult box and name the fact that this is not working. And without that being released to become something else, it's really difficult for us to sit at the table and make any sense. Not safe for us all to sit at the table.
My back always goes up when I go into these meetings, even church, whatever, and they use that expression, safe space, because 99 times out of 100, I do not feel safe. And in actual fact, I am not safe. You do going in, you're devoured. So sometimes that's going to happen going in, and you go in to be that, in quote, that living sacrifice, because you've got to go and do that thing. But a lot of times you just want to relax and put your feet up and enjoy what's there. But you can't, because you're always on edge, always on guard. And especially if you have that strong sense of justice and equality as well, you can't keep quiet.
That must be exhausting.
Oh, it is.
And, one of the things that came out to me in the papers a number of times was the burden on people who are already experiencing marginalization and oppression. So it's not enough that that's their lived day-to-day reality. The burden also is upon them to make the conversations happen, to do the theology, to make space to speak and be heard, and to bear the weight of the kickback, and that there needs to be permission to rest in the midst of that. And also to those of us who could be good allies need to get up and be good allies, and not keep sitting back because it's not my lived experience, so it can wait until I'm a little bit less busy.
Because I also come from an evangelical background. Is there something you think you could identify about a certain way of reading scripture that gets in the way of the vision of God's shalom? And the second part of that is, where do you see in these chapters like people pushing against that?
I think there is something that hinders their objective reading of it, or new reading or fresh reading of it, and that is probably 1500 years of Western Christian thought.
Just that little thing.
and probably more. It gets in the way. One of John Hull, one of his books is What Gets in the Way of Adult Christian Learning. It's the desire to always be right. We put the desire to be right above the relationship and above everything else. When you have every denomination, every group, every parachurch group, whatever, saying we are the only true church and we have the faith that was once delivered and we are the successors of Jesus and Peter, that gets in the way. So when Jesus came and started to tell these stories, and he gave them a totally new meaning of it, why are we any different 2000 years later? We should be reading these with new hermeneutics. Liberation theology, women's theology, and all of that helps me with my reading and to ask some of those difficult questions. So now when I come to those, in quote, difficult scriptures, actually, a lot of times I think, actually, it's pretty plain what Jesus is saying here. Why did we need 3 pages of dialogue to try to explain what Jesus was saying quite plainly?
To protect us from having our lives burst open by what he's actually saying. But I have been taught that everyone else must be wrong and I must be right, otherwise I can't feel okay. So much of that is really rooted in fear. It comes across as strength, but it's rooted in just a profound insecurity and fear that I must be right. I've got to be right, and because actually underneath it all, I'm terrified and insecure and need to secure myself in some way, and this is the way I've been taught to do it, to be right and for everyone else to be wrong. And so I do think just naming and addressing fear as part of the dynamic of how we come to scripture is massive. And to break through some of these paradigms that we've been educated into is to stop reading scripture as print on a page, but to hear it in different settings. And there's something that happens to my brain if I read print on a page than if I hear somebody share something to me. And my brain says, well, this is a fact. This is true. You go about understanding this in a completely different way than if you have a personal encounter and information is exchanged. Because I can't remember the information enough to go at it like it just breaks something open for me.
Paul wrote letters, didn't he, to be read out.
It's that dialogical relationship, isn't it? It's both speaking and the hearing.
But it always comes back to relationship, doesn't it? When I think about George Floyd, I didn't know him, but yet there was some sort of deep-rooted relationship and connection with that. If we really believe this, what does it look like if we lived it? And how do we draw other people into wanting to hear the story and then live it themselves? And that's why the importance of narrative and telling those stories and having people come from all sorts of different backgrounds, black, white, trans, whatever it is, telling their story, and people actually just say, you know what, just shut up for a bit and listen, you might learn something.
The theme of tables was quite key, wasn't it, in the papers, and the fact that the passage is about eating together. I think that came through to me in Danielle's paper in particular, about her experience of being hosted by the LGBTQ community and how transformational that was. And it really reminded me of that practice of Jesus, who seemed to choose not to have the resources to be able to play host. He was at the table of
Yeah.
the other all the time. He wasn't inviting the other to his table where he
Yeah,
already felt
yeah,
safe.
yeah. Well,
And I just love that as a spiritual practice. If we spend time at the if I spend time at the table of the other, maybe even at the table of the enemy,
yeah,
then I might find transformation possible.
yeah.
But I think the reality that's also in this papers is that transformation is slow and long
Yeah.
and painful and requires organization and dedication and resilience. You
Yeah.
know, so not to be too fantastical about it all.
As I say in my congregation, I've been saying it for years now. Says there's two gifts or fruits of the spirit. They're not listed, but they're vital. One is imagination, and the other one is creativity.
Yeah.
And if we're flexible, you know, again, it doesn't mean you have to accept everything. There are some things, you know, nah, don't like that, don't accept it, right? But I try not to allow that to be a barrier
Yeah.
to in my relationship with other people. I'm wrestling inside, you know, but there was something I didn't like, didn't appreciate, whatever. You know, I'm sure people feel that way about me. You know,
Yeah.
but you allow the time and the grace of God, and I've been proved on numerous occasions in numerous things that very person I thought this of or judged this way or they're the ones who turned up. They're the ones who taught me something. They're the one, you know. And the person who was most like me was the one I had the greatest problem with, really, when I was in need, you know. So
Wow.
again, the first shall be last and the last first. You know? So yeah, so now I say God has a sense of humor as well, because he's always teaching me, you know, well, if he can use a donkey, you know, he can use whatever to teach me, and he does.
So what stuck out to me is this kind of shared theme coming out from both of you of peace not being able to be imposed if it's
Yeah.
true, and being able to be with others without fear or worry. But at the same time, Jesus being at the table of the other where he knew he might not be safe. So it seems
And he
like there's a
wasn't
real
sometimes.
tension.
Yeah.
Yeah, and wasn't.
But it is, and part of it is about risk, because sorry, I'm turning Isaiah now into a cartoon. Just imagine if the lion is there at the table and the lamb is now coming along. You know, my first thought is not going to be, oh, I feel really safe here. So, you know, or if I'm the ox and there's a lion about, you know, I'm thinking, I don't know if I want to be there. But sometimes we go into the proverbial lion's den, don't we? And we get some surprises.
I think there's got to be permission as well for that to be one aspect of life. There's got to be those spaces where you're not the lamb at the table with the lion, surely. You know, to be psychologically, spiritually, physically well, that's got to be a part of your existence. The kind of finding the spaces which don't question your existence or your right to exist. Yeah,
but it's interesting how God does give us occasionally respite from it, and you do find a person or a place that just gives you a little bit of time to heal and to adjust. But part of that for me is delving into a book, doing my studies, you know. And I remember a significant period of time, maybe for about 3 years or so, that my only comfort, refuge, support was delving into various authors and reading their material, because people just weren't doing it for me. And then because of my Caribbean background as well, music plays a large part of that as well. So sometimes, you know, just listening to music. But yeah, for a long time, I would devour books in days. It's what you again were saying earlier about that transformation that takes time. And God just has a way of just placing maybe what you need, what food you need, getting back to the table analogy, or sending those people alongside just to walk with you for a few miles, you know. But a lot of the time it is lonely still, because, you know, I think when you're called to that prophetic stroke evangelists rather than evangelical role, I think a lot of times it's very lonely. Pastor as well, sometimes it can be very, very lonely, but God does send us resources, I think, to help us sometimes. But I think we've got to be real about that as well, that you do go on your own a lot.
Maybe my final question, as we're coming up on our time, when we talk about going alone, having courage, having imagination in the face of opposition, is where do you see, perhaps highlighted in these chapters and connected with your own experience, that bravery and courage, that sustaining vision that keeps one in those spaces where they feel like they're going it alone?
We can't give up hope, because peace, truth, justice eventually will come out. Do what you can now, right? Build on what's gone before, hopefully leaving something for somebody else to pick it up and run with it as well. Sometimes I'm Jeremiah. Right? I'm miserable, and then another day it's just like, do you know what? Come on, world, I'm ready for you. Sometimes I don't know what's created that difference. And sometimes I do. Sometimes it is really, sometimes interestingly, it's when you know, quoting from Hebrews, that you know that there's a cloud of witnesses who are supporting you and actively praying for you. And sometimes you can feel that, and you don't know who it is, but you just know there's some people out there who are with me at the moment, so I can go into the lion's den, and that lion better get out my way. God is still active, not just in me, but in community. So even when I feel alone, because Jesus felt alone, and angels had to come and minister to him, and sometimes we feel alone and we need someone to minister us, and sometimes God just gives us that feeling, that thought, yeah, there are others with you, keep going.
Yeah. I'm really conscious that I'm speaking from the position of being an ally. It reminded me that this is the vision that I'm rooted in.
Yeah.
I think I'm at a season where I've had quite a long period of time where I've come to understand myself in terms of being a fighter and a warrior and a resistor. And I think over time, I started to root myself in the present rather than rooting myself in the vision. And so for me, this was a reminder that to be able to be part of what God is doing in terms of bringing peace in the ways that we've talked about, I have got to be rooted in the vision, in the dream, the thing that feels so impossible and so out of reach. I have got to be rooted in that place, because if I don't, I get rooted in the war, in the fight, and I identify in that place. And I cease to be very helpful in that place because I've just got caught up in it. So for me, it was a real reminder of a question to myself, like, where are you rooted, Helen? And actually, quite recently, I've felt a real need to shift my own rootedness to, oh no, actually, I'm not a fighter. I'm a person of peace that sometimes has to fight.